Good day to you. This is Anagalactic on the 14th day of December. We're only a week away from the Northern Hemisphere winter solstice. Well, I hope you're prepared for Christmas. I hope you're having a good season. Up above, you'll see here an image from Los Alamos National Laboratory in the United States, which is entitled with "This is Planet Mars." You'll see that it has some very tiny print. So there are two titles for this image taken from Wikipedia. The main title in the upper left-hand corner is Water Equivalent Hydrogen Abundance. This is a composite or panoramic image of the entire surface of Mars that was composed by using a special scientific tool called the neutron spectrometer. And the other title that's in the upper left-hand corner is called the Water Equivalent Hydrogen Abundance. The dark blue, which you see at the perimeter, is 0%, and it is representing the Martian equator. The red shows 100% water equivalent hydrogen abundance, where you see the red is at the North Pole going to 100% water. The South Pole has a similar configuration, but it's less concentrated at the pole. And in fact, you see that the pole has kind of a depression, if I may use that extended term, or extend that term. So this basically indicates water on Mars. Now, essentially, what that means for us is that it's time to take another tour of the universe. But over the past 3.5 years of broadcasting from the AE channel here, we have been interested in the universe because the byline for this station is The Secrets of the Universe, which, as we have carefully explored, is an object which should be finite, since an object, at least in the geometric sense, must be finite in order to be an object. Is the universe, therefore, legitimately to be called an object? And if so, can we study it? Well, here at this institute, we have taken the traditional view that it can be studied because it can be at least conceived as an object, although it would be more geometrically accurately called a space, which is a geometric abstraction on our concept of physical space. It does appear to be infinite, but of course nobody can decide that because that is an irrational concept. And that term irrational has more than one meaning, just as space has more than one meaning. But irrational has a layered meaning depending on context. Here, as is typical of my way of approaching wordsmithing, I'm using the word in a brand new, unknown, undefined so far sense, where irrational is no longer being used as a mathematical term, which is one of its primary definitions, that an irrational number is a two-component number called a fraction that cannot be reduced to a linear number. I have explored the geometric side of cosmic science so as to address this issue of mathematical irrationality. There is also a psychologic, or you could say mental, concept of irrationality, which is a term from logic, not mathematics, where an irrational statement is one that does not reduce to a logical form and therefore cannot be considered to be rational, which is in fact an extension of the mathematical definition of comparing two quantities. In the case of a number, the two-component number form called a fraction is a proportion between two quantities, which in mathematical terminology is called the numerator on top and the denominator on the bottom. Those are considered to be and must be two linear numbers. That is so profound that I've given literally innumerable videos on the geometric and mathematical extrapolation of that unaccountable, basically irrational relationship, essentially illegal. Essentially, the original or mental definition of irrational. It makes no sense. So irrational means not proportional, not reducible or reducible to a logical proportion of quantities. What does that have to do with water on Mars? Well, let's explore this a little further with some photographs. All right, this is another rather impressive double shot of Mars, where the first circle, which is basically orange and umber, is depicting Mars in terms of water content. The similar circle to the right is blue. That indicates that the surface of Mars in the southern hemisphere was covered with an ocean. This was just recently discovered by the various Martian explorers that have been sent by the United States Consolidated Earth Government to our nearest planetary neighbor going outward from the sun. Very good. So Mars used to be just like the Earth. That's what's been discovered, and that would explain why the Consolidated Government of Earth, now centered in New York in the United States, that basically is the site that runs the world now, both economically, politically, very close to getting political dominance. Israel is taking care of that on behalf of essentially NATO. But the economic situation is well in hand, and the United States, as we'll continue to call it, although it's actually a beast, according to Revelation, the last prophecy, and Enoch, the first prophecy. So Earth has a very, very strange history, as we've come to find out from our rudimentary and cursory examination of world scripture. Now, I have not given more than a couple of video presentations of the non-Shemitic religions of Earth, which number in the thousands, of course, because every society on Earth, which number in the thousands in this sense, at this scale, produce a religion, which, as we have discussed, uniformly, always, consistently begins with the cycles of nature, from which are derived, using the powerful mind of man, or humankind, the extrapolation of the cycles of nature extended into the sky, heaven. Heaven is occupied by gods. Gods. And in the West here, the way I was raised, from my coercive educational system over which I had no power either of control or resistance, I was brainwashed and indoctrinated for good or perhaps not so good into a common human perception of heaven. Heaven, according to the white Western world, about 15% of the Earth's population is white-skinned, such as mine, which is not really white. It's more of a peach rose or rosy peach color in general, because it's on a spectrum. The spectrum of coloration of human phenotypically determined skin types is such a fascinating concept that it occurs in the anomalous prophecy fully approved by heaven, using the psychological definition of heaven in this case, which is religious. The prophecy of Muhammad, 1,350 years ago in Arabia, a very strange and actually very good communication from heaven was initiated through the angel or angelos or angel Gabriel or Gabriel, the same angel that spoke to Daniel, who is considered by Yeshua to be the most significant of all the Israeli prophets in one specific context. He specifically, according to the records that we have of Yeshua saying anything, he told his disciples, which by religious extension would include the modern generation, including myself and you, should one choose to believe that transmission, Yeshua directed his people to take careful observation of the very last prophecy of Daniel, who was not prophesying from Israel, even though technically he was an Israeli. And to be specific, he was a Yehudi, that is a Yehud in modern terms, although this is a little skewed. He would be called typically in common speech a Jew, which is simply a member of one of the tribes of Israel, and significantly the tribe through whom Yeshua, which is in English sometimes said Jesus, a hideous way of saying his beautiful name, but in Islam his name is Isa, which is very close to the diminutive form of Yeshua, which is in English Joshua very often. Jesus is the Spanish or Mediterranean form of his name. But Isa is very close to Yesha, which is a name that I have only seen once, and it was in Old Testament scripture, where I did extensive and extraordinary detailed study of certain ancient words in order to decipher the Tetragrammaton, but I was also interested in deciphering all of prophecy, at which occupation I was largely successful by any standard, but still falling far short of what we would like to know. Now, to return to our cosmic subject, the lacuna in my 3.5-year broadcast sequence, currently approaching 1,400 videos of a little less than an average length of an hour, of which 400 are currently made public, but there are another 1,000 which are privatized for various reasons, mostly just to archive them so that the top percentile of what I would consider the best presentations are still made public, which you can consult at any time. But I have prided myself, if that's the right verb, on giving guided tours of the universe, which, as we just carefully discussed, has a very interesting definition, which is either rational or irrational. That is, it's either an object of study, or you could not quite properly say that it's an object because it has no edge. And that has mystified the mind of man. But in my approach to the cosmos with a capital C, which is synonymous in my way of using proper nouns, it's synonymous with our more common word universe. I don't really object to the word universe, but I do prefer to be extraordinarily precise because that is the nature of investigative science. Now, the universe is the cosmos extrapolated to its largest order of size, which would be the entire thing, which we're not quite sure what that might be, but we have a pretty good idea of what's in it thus far seen. The fact that there's no definable limit, and the James Webb Telescope has conclusively proved that there is no theory of the universe yet, because there is no conceivable universe, because the James Webb Telescope has confirmed, and this is now admitted, finally admitted, even by the Big Bang people, we have to start over. We simply don't know what we're talking about at all. We don't know what the universe is. There's no perception of the universe, none. Not by the strict definition of an object that can be conceived in the human mind, because it has no edge. That also means that it has no time horizon. And that has led to some of the most amazing theoretical extrapolations in the history of mankind. But as we're going to find out today, we may not be thinking wildly enough. The characterizing adjective that I have applied very often to modern science is that it is psychotic. That could be sustained, and I believe in proper context it is properly psychotic. But that has to do with mass broadcast psychology, what is called memic implantation, which is a form of copulation according to the most ancient prophecy. So we are being fucked with by a higher intelligence. But what religion helps us to do with that strange statement, which you may not like, I wouldn't blame you a bit if you didn't like it, but as a scientist, we have to be courageous. We have to face the limits of human perception, which goes to our crazy fucking center of our fucking mind called consciousness, which ultimately has very little to do with physical reality if you compare the human consciousness with its basically sub-oceanic position of being in a giant inconceivable ocean of emotion. Ocean of emotion. Someone should write a song. So to get to the point here, so we can go on a tour of the universe, on which I have prided myself as a scientific presenter, to give you new perspectives on the universe, to do what the Starship Enterprise was acclaimed to be doing in the 1960s, to seek out and explore new horizons of the universe. Well, I left out a huge part of the universe, which is that part that we understand best in terms of cosmological units, really cosmic units as I call them, of which there are exactly 7, matching prophecy of 7 heavens, including the heaven of heavens, which would be the infinite part, which is not a part because infinity has 0 definition. Well, until I came along, it actually has a rational definition now, both mathematically and geometrically. But nobody cares to hear about that. So, okay, I will withdraw my discoveries and keep them to myself. But we're still interested in the universe. Even though I've left you behind and you don't want to catch up, that is part of your free will. You do not have to put up with a crazy looking pundit wearing dark glasses or otherwise, wearing some kind of dragon shirt adorned with gold, whatever, who drinks from a cup that has a very anti scientific proposition on it, which is basically a command. Taste and see that the Lord is good, which is taken from a psalm. What kind of a man is taking you out into the universe to show you new horizons? Well, the word lacuna is a most interesting word, for the part that I left out has an abstract name, believe it or not. It's called a hole in the head, which was a term that my mother liked to use, speaking either directly to or about us children, of whom she had three, and I was the first. I was the male, and then she had two girls, who are typically called females in scientific language, but in sexual language have many other names, most of which I would never call my sisters, but white Western chauvinism, really shared by all populations on the earth, discrimination against the female race, is just notorious that men just oppress women in every way they can. Obviously, they're weaker, and we need them for sex, so we oppress them. I don't, but everybody else apparently takes it for granted that we do, whatever. I am not really part of the human race. I think you can tell at a glance. And if you take another look at my favorite coffee cup, taste and see that the Lord is good, it's obvious that I'm out of my mind. Absolutely. I pride myself on being crazy. I consider that to be a great advantage, since the population of the world is obviously bent on showing that it's as insane as is humanly possible, but in the very worst senses. I am crazy, not insane. I take a crazy view of astronomy and cosmology, and in fact, geometry and mathematics, and in fact, everything, including prophecy. I take the wildest, most far out points of view conceivable. But the strange thing about my system is that it is logical. It's based on the truth, not on imagination. But now we have to examine our nearest cosmic unit. It's not the cosmos with no edge. The cosmos with a lowercase c, of which there are 6, the imperfect number we just discovered from Revelation. Not 7, the number of perfection.
God damn it.
This is psychological, obviously, but the number 7 has always had the reputation in certain very large
Jesus.
circles of humans, extending to the white race apparently quite elaborately, that the number 6 is evil and the number 7 is perfect and therefore divine. So the number 7 is divine, but one counting unit before the number 7, 6, is absolutely satanic, devilishly evil, and horrific even to conceive that there is such a number. But thank God, if you choose to use that word for whatever it means, the number 7 takes care of everything. Once you get past 1 through 5, which don't matter at all except in sacred geometry, apparently, once you get to 6, you've encountered Satan himself, whatever that is. And then if you just go one more, counting number forward from 6 to 7, you've achieved the highest heaven, you've solved everything, you've found the truth, and you're done. You don't even need to consider 2 to the third power, 8, which would be, in my opinion, much superior either to 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and then we'd have to stop because 2 and 1 are sacred numbers. But the number 8 is in sequence. If you go 1, the first number in the universe, to 2, you've established the binary system, and if you combine those two numbers, 1 and 2, you establish the wavelength frequency relationship, which gives us the rudimentary and quite logical and actually second stage axiomatic beginning of a true number system, where now you have a choice between a single component number system, which mankind has used for well over 2,000 years, including all of Western science, or you could, as has never been done until I came along, begin with a two-component number system called proportionality, very often called multiplicative space, which, as I carefully pointed out to you, was brainwashed into your mind and every other mind that knows anything about modern mathematics, the incorrect number system based on a complete fantasy on what a number is. That's called linear mathematics, extended to linear algebra, and then we run into a huge problem, which was partially solved by Leibniz and Newton to give us a method of converting from a two-component geometry to a one-component geometry in the form of numbers. That's called the calculus. But then another tool was invented, you could say along about the same time on a large enough time scale, the ultra-modern complex number plane, which is the world's first two-component number system if you exclude fractions, which I don't, because that's the answer to everything. So to just depart from our mathematical geometric foundation, we're now addressing actual reality, physical space. And physical space is what separates one piece of matter from another, such as the Earth from Mars. There is a certain amount of space between the surface of the Earth and the surface of Mars, which using the calculus can be made as precise as you like, and with modern technology can be made very precise indeed. So that we can say, using our irrational mathematical mind, that we can get an exact distance to Mars, which is an absurd statement, but no, not anymore, because we use calculus for everything we do, and there's no such thing in the human realm as precision. That was proved by quantum mechanics in the 20th century, that we don't do anything exactly. We can't see anything precisely. There is no way to take an exact measurement ever. There's no such thing as an exact measurement, but there's a footnote to that having to do with the Planck length, which I have correctly discerned, although this is known, it's not talked about because nobody seems to like it. The fact that there are two Planck lengths, one in the derivative number system that we've always used, and one in the universal number system, which we've never used. And you might think, just based on my crazy idea, that perhaps we should be using the integral number system, since by definition, it is always precise. Nobody wants that because it doesn't serve Satan. Now, Satan, as you know, from the way I use that term, simply refers to the degraded, decadent, evil side of the mind of man. Because that's the only way we can even measure Satan, is by man's evil actions. That's how we know that there is a Satan. However you define that, which you may not like, again, I would not blame you if you're just repelled, you're just horrified that I would be talking about such exalted, worshipful subjects, and I'm just using the common framework, the worshipful, magnificently holy numbers and mathematical system of the whites, well, we need that to serve Satan, because it's Satan that's exploring Mars. And everything you just saw about the water that used to cover Mars is due to the curiosity of Satan. This is a conglomerate, really humankind effort to discover our origins according to the will of Satan, which would be to block true understanding, so that man continues to serve Satan. I think that that's reasonable from a philosophical framework, because no scientist can avoid staring into the face of the abyss. Everywhere you look, you can't even orient, and evil is what disorients us most. Why are humans, with our powerful minds, executing mass destruction against the earth, including our fellow humans, which we, I believe, rightly consider to be the worst aspect of our insanity? Why are humans evil? Why is there a Satan? Whatever it is, why is there a force of evil? Well, the force of evil itself is attempting to get to the bottom of this question in its own way, using humans as slaves to pilot its satanically controlled craft all the way to Mars, where there are now rovers right now just wandering around the planet searching for whatever Satan is seeking there. Why does Satan need to know what's on Mars? Water. There was water on Mars. Now, if Satan should have any consciousness independent of that of humans, as I believe can be proved, then Satan is extremely old. Of course, Satan was around when the solar system was created. That leads us into our topic for today. The smallest cosmos in the great cosmos is the solar system, which is finite. It has more than one edge because it depends on how you measure the edge of a cosmic unit, which is very difficult to do. However, using the calculus, we can get a precise definition of the solar system. Now, you and I know of the solar system in our progress to adulthood. We discover that, first of all, there are clouds and birds. So there is such a thing as anti-gravity. They float around way up high. A thunderhead is one of the most devastating objects ever beheld by a child's little mind. And I was on the East Coast as a child, and I saw thunderheads form from the surface of the earth. And it's absolutely religiously devastating that these clouds, which are floating above the surface of the earth, they're not being dragged down by the force of gravity, they're up in the air. Well, in California in 2020, about 15,000 thunderheads formed in one night, and again, devastated California at the last second just before the blessed rains. And in 2020, the entire state of California was massacred with the world's worst inferno ever recorded, all generated from these floating mountains in the sky. So we're talking about pure science fiction that's actually reality. And now we've discovered water on Mars, and not just water on Mars. There are about 24 separate measurements that have been made by the rovers, and in fact even the drones, which are flying around Mars, and the orbital surveyors, which are circling Mars, just photographing every fucking thing that can be fucking photographed about Mars, we now know that it used to be Earth-like. And Satan is looking for something there. And Satan, by one definition, which I fully accept because I'm crazy, as you know, but in a good sense. This is scientifically crazy. What I'm really saying is, we haven't gone far enough in our insanity. Well, we don't want insanity, that's a satanic concept. But craziness is the highest form of human thought, we can now say. That we're just not thinking far enough outside the box. I myself, in examining this over the past week, by synchronistic convergence, I've been led back to the lacuna in my system, on which I pride myself to present to you the truth of the universe. Well, that is a noble goal, but am I missing something? Yes. The part of my tours of the universe that I've left out is a tour of the solar system. And we can't go to Venus, although the Russians did land on the surface for 3 seconds. It's unbelievable. It's a temperature of molten lead, and the atmosphere is composed mostly of sulfuric acid. The very definition of primeval hell is our innermost planetary neighbor, Venus. Then Mercury is just a little cosmic pimple, absolutely covered with craters, which science has never explained. So beginning at the innermost planet, we have no idea what we're looking at, and we have to come up with something crazy, not insane, but crazy. Then there's Venus, the hell planet, and nobody can explain that. We have mapped the surface of Venus. Now going out, we have a second Earth. It used to be covered with oceans. There are river systems rivaling anything on the Colorado Plateau, which is really saying something. The solar system's largest volcano is on Mars. And now Satan, that is the United States government, representing us all in the name of evil, is trying to find something on Mars. Well, in my crazy extrapolations, because I've been exposed to a lot of really crazy scientific ideas, which I'm greatly attracted to, I think. I can say for all of us, we may not like to admit it because you don't want to be labeled crazy. Well, no, this is not a stigma as long as you define it the way I defined it. It's the highest form of human thought. You're trying to actually understand something that you never could understand before. Well, that's going to be crazy by definition. Like the sun does not fly through the sky as a chariot. Well, you'd have to be crazy. Well, Galileo was crazy enough to say so. More or less, he actually accepted the Tycho. Galileo is commonly admitted to have been crazy enough to get it right, to a new threshold, which is what science is all about. Well, can we understand our solar system? That's the question I'd like to address. In the next video, which will be in about an hour after I've had breakfast and a shower, you can see that I've just woke up, basically. On this frigid day, we did not get hit by fires this year, and it looks like we're going to make it. If nature does not send another hurricane from the south way late in the season that actually breaches the Sierra Nevada range and causes 15,000 fires. Good day to you. This is Anagalactic on the 14th day of December 2025, and we are currently exploring our nearest cosmic unit, the one we are in, as in fact, we are in a larger cosmic unit called the Galaxy that was discovered exactly a century ago. So we've come a long way in our exploration of cosmic space going out. But the lacuna, the hole in my head, or the hole in my Turing system, that is Touring, but it could be a hole in my Turing system, named after the famous British homosexual who was persecuted by his government, apparently just for having a sexual identity. Whatever the case, touring is famous, as is the act of touring, which can be done on a bicycle, in a car, or on foot, or in a spacecraft, and it looks like Satan is doing a tour of the local cosmos. So far, Satan has reached the moon, for whatever reason, ostensibly military. That's what I was told. That seems reasonable enough in a first pass analysis. So Satan got to the moon in order to have military capacity. That makes sense. Now Satan is exploring Mars and has discovered that Mars used to be just like Earth. Whether or not it had life is a religious question ultimately, and we don't wish to go there at this time, because instead we want to go crazy. That's what science has to do. It's quite obvious that science is trying to go crazy, but as we'll learn from this author that we see some of his text over here, from which I'll be reading, we haven't gone crazy enough. Now, as I carefully distinguished, we're not talking about insanity, which is obviously satanic, but craziness, which is borderline holy. Because this is how we use our rational logical system to go where no man has gone before, which in science is to discover something about our environment which will give us a clue to death. We need to understand what happens to a human when a human dies. We have a religious idea of that, which if you trace it back far enough using pure psychology, it appears that man invented the idea of a seventh heaven where souls ultimately are trying to get to, kind of like a photon falling to the edge of the finite universe, in order to penetrate the finite universe to get out of this goddamn place, because when you're dead, you certainly don't want to return to Earth. That would be reincarnation. Nobody likes that except the Hindu people who are clearly insane, not crazy. However, there's a fine line currently, certainly at the human level, the science level, the religious level, where there's just the most quantum difference, is the tiniest difference between being staring out of your mind and therefore worthless, if not satanic, and the greatest prophet of all time, either on the scientific side or some other side. Over here we have the notorious name Velikovsky. This is from a book called Velikovsky Rediscovered from 1976, which was a reanalysis and summary of Velikovsky's crazy ideas. Velikovsky had extremely crazy ideas about Venus and Mars. Satan has been very interested in all the planets, particularly Saturn, but also the outermost planets, which have been reclassified so as to put Pluto outside the realm of planetary objects and inside the realm of what Dr. Walter Brown, the famous creation science researcher, who proved that the Colorado Plateau was scoured by the Ecocidal Flood, which he doesn't accredit to its proper source, Dr. Walter Alvarez, who discovered that the Earth was struck by what I was calling a comet, which is technically incorrect. It was an asteroid, but it was recently proved in pure geological science that the source of the biblical flood was in fact an asteroid strike 8,000 years ago, give or take 1,000 years. So that has been proved, and that, of course, reinstates the Bible as the ultimate authority for mankind, giving the Sanhedrin in Israel, which is being resurfaced by the Zionists, in order to have a judicial force much more powerful than the United Nations. So Satan is completing all of his plans, but now we have a Solomonic aspect. Solomonic refers to the Mormons, it refers to the Illuminati, it refers to the Knights of Malta, it refers to the Crusades, and most importantly, it refers to Solomon's Temple. all of which is completely crazy, if not stark staring mad, but it's all historically supported that Solomon had demonic power. He was the last of the Israeli emperors. There were only two, David, the famous psalmist, an accredited prophet, and Shlomo, who was the next king in the golden age of the Israeli Empire, and Shlomo was in touch with demons. That is commonly admitted. That's why the Mormons exist, is to resuscitate that idea in their form of what they call a temple, which is satanic. Now, the Mormons themselves, I greatly favor in terms of Christian moral values. They're extraordinarily good people, just as the Jews are, and just as Catholics are, and just as Christians are, and just as Islamic people and Chinese people and Polynesian, North American, South American, African, Australian, etc., are all wonderful people, because we're made in the image of God. I fully accept that. So what went wrong? Well, that's what we're trying to find out, and now we know from prophetic scripture as well as direct evidence that the Earth is under the control of a foreign power. That is an extraplanetary power. And since I am now involved in this craziness, in order to expand our minds into a realm that we can't handle, but we're going to have to handle somehow, if we want any answers at all, we're going to have to reconsider Velikovsky, because it looks like Satan originally lived on Mars. And there was a full-fledged civilization on Mars that was ruled by Satan and other angels. And they're called the Watchers. And that's where they watched us from. They would regularly fly in their UFO craft to Earth and descend to Earth and commingle, particularly with human women, but actually, as I've proved, that's a Suffolk reference to the male anima. Women are of no interest whatsoever, either to human men, except for screwing, and they're certainly of no interest to heaven, either on the dark or the light side. Women are simply a sign of God, and therefore can be totally disregarded, just as the rainbow or anything else that proves the existence of a loving creator. That is totally up for grabs. Nobody in the West believes that. The Islamic people do believe that. I do as well, and therefore I consider myself to be Islam, and in fact the leader of Islam, called an imam. So that's crazy, and I also say I'm the hidden one, and I'm a direct descendant of Rumi, and I've connected Rumi's poetry with God himself. Again, crazy, but we need some answers, so we're going to have to go out into the cloud, and in this case, the cloud is not abstract, it's the heliosphere. We need to understand how the solar system got here, and what is happening inside the solar system, since it's clear now and has been scientifically proved, no questions asked, human beings are locked in here. That's natural, but it's not natural for Satan, or the fallen angels, the Watchers, the evil angels, whom God is about to destroy with his own armies, and the entire battlefield will be on Earth. That's called the apocalypse. So that is a scientific, well-established, futuristic prospect which we now can see all around us. Israel, which is Satan, is winning and has in fact won. Now the United States, which is Satan's butt boy, is being used as a slave population in order to get to the moon and Mars, and in fact to explore the entire heliosphere. But Satan has his radar fixed on Mars. Most likely, according to my new crazy theory, which goes well beyond Velikovsky, Satan used to live on Mars, and several angels, actually hundreds of angels, if not more, had defected because they noticed that it was a good deal of fun to fuck with humans. And that's where we get the term to fuck with, or to fuck your mind. That's what's meant by the propagation of the hybrid race of Nephilim. Those are now fully identified as Israeli Zionists and American mathematicians. They have teamed up in order to conquer the world, but there's much more involved that we have no right to know anything about. Alas, we have powerful minds. We're going to find out anyway. That's why I am pursuing Velikovsky, whose books I had perused about 3 to 4 decades ago and considered him to be too crazy for me. He has theories of the close approach of Venus and the close approach of Mars to Earth, which he links to the crossing of the Red Sea by the Israeli nigger slaves who were being rescued by their hero, whom they then turned on and murdered. So that's all the Israelis are murderers, and the only good thing about the United States, even from the point of view of Satan, is that it's a nation of thieves. So that's the United States. It's a band of thieves, as we all know. Certainly Trump proves it, but you can check history. That's all America has ever been, is a band of robbers. They've raped the entire North American continent and destroyed all the holy redwood trees, filled in the ultra-holy San Francisco Bay, destroyed the magnificently holy Sierra Nevada alpine meadows. They fished out the Monterey Bay of its sardine population, almost inconceivably rapacious, but that's the nature of Satan, who is in full control of the white race, as I've proved. So the whites are the enemy of the earth, the Islam people are the heroes, but as I just revealed, Islam is lost and can do nothing. They are no longer under the control of God. So the entire earth has gone psychotic, and this is not crazy, it's madness. And that's where we find ourselves, and that's why we do drugs, that's why we change our sexual identity. We'll do anything to relieve the agony of the abyss, which is where everything is headed. Total damnation, total oblivion is what many of the Jews prefer to think, so they don't have to think about it at all, because they've lost all contact with religion, having come to Europe and been turned into sewer rats. So that's where the human race is at. Nobody cares about true logic anymore, because everybody knows that logic simply will not do it. I disagree with that. You cannot abandon logic because it's DNA programmed, and therefore we have to ask, why do we have a brain at all? What in God's name, if you're willing to blaspheme, which I'm not, but I'm just saying the common expression, what in God's name are humans doing here in the universe? Well, as you know, every crack-brained, hair-brained, psychotic, or mad theory has been proposed, and everybody loves it because it relieves the boredom and agony of oblivion. We have proved logically there's no such thing as consciousness oblivion. Now that you have a consciousness, you're stuck with it for all eternity, as even the Zen Buddhists say. So if you don't take mushrooms, drop LSD, or do some magnificently powerful modern pharmaceutical drug to alter your mind, you're going to have to find a way out of your labyrinth before you die, because when you die, it's too late. So we're on a fool's errand. There can be no possible good outcome unless there's something transcendental that can invade the mind of man to conjugate us with the universe so we can die happy. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's where we're at. I'm simply reporting the news. And now I'm going to read from this excellent review of Velikovsky's crazy ideas. Another aspect of Velikovsky theory that, for me, ultimately works in his favor is the sheer tenacity with which certain key aspects of the theory have resisted outright disproof. The state of science being what it is today, one would think that it should be a doable task to categorically refute a theory that has been as widely critiqued and derided as Velikovsky's. From the standpoint of traditional astronomers, there are at least a dozen points at which Velikovsky's theory might potentially be shown to be flatly wrong. Many would say that his theory has long since been flatly disproved. Yet, over time, as new facts emerge, these points take on a new life as subtle aspects of the theory continue to be shown to be ultimately valid. That may remind you of our recent exploit into Colorado Plateau geology, Himalayan geology, and Antarctican geology, just to name three at the top of a huge list of geological features of the Earth that absolutely confirm there was a flood less than 8 to 10,000 years ago, which completely destroyed the ecology. All land-based life was buried under sedimentary layers, as anyone can verify, by just the presence of the oil fields on Earth, but also the entire Colorado Plateau, which covers 4 states in the central United States. It used to be a gigantic inland sea, and now those inland seas have been discovered on Mars. There is no question that there was global flooding on Mars within the time frame of Earth history, which is 10,000 years as we know now. So whatever happened on Earth also happened on Mars, and my theory, which goes way, way beyond Velikovsky, who was just a kindergarten toddler compared with myself, Satan used to live on Mars. And it had an ocean in the northern hemisphere, according to the latest data from the Martian probe sent by Satan to find something. Let's get right to my theory so that Velikovsky's ideas will seem sane compared with mine. It looks like what Satan wants on Mars, for which he is hunting right now with all of his strength and all of his might, Satan is trying to find something that is still on Mars, that Satan knows that it's there, but he's finding it difficult to locate, although he has some idea of where it is. The big question in this maniacal, crazy, outrageous, potentially psychotic theory, which we're forced to at least consider, is that what he's looking for is something that is documented in demonological religion, which the Jews, if they didn't invent it, they certainly got it directly from Satan. It has to do with the Solomonic Temple and Solomonic demonology, all of which is just completely taboo for a Christian scholar, except, obviously, I'm the exception. So I have discovered, against my natural will, because nobody wants to discover this kind of shit, that Solomon had access to demonic power. He had a key to the box of demonology, whatever that even means, and it was buried somewhere and finally put out of his reach, as upon the death of Solomon, the Israeli Empire splintered into the north and south, just as happened in the United States, and they hated each other ever since. The northern secessionist tribes, equivalent to the south, the nigger slave owners, the Israelis were much worse, and they sought, of course, to conquer Judah, but the Lord wouldn't allow that. He hated the Israeli tribes, and so he told them to get lost, and then to show he meant business, he had them deported, and they were eventually lost. A pure miracle, which cannot be explained by any scientist. How do you lose 10 whole tribes? Only God could have done that, so we fully accept the Bible for that reason alone. If you accept this approach, which is a little bit lopsided, well, it's a little difficult when you don't know what the hell you're doing or saying, as that is the case according to this expositor of Velikovsky's crazy theories. Mine are crazier. It looks like what happened at the flood is that Mars was struck and Mars was destroyed, and that would explain how the Watchers were forced to Earth, that they were blown off the planet and all of them landed on Earth, which is why the Earth is in such extraordinary turmoil. So Mars was the target of a, you would have to say, heavenly sent bolide, which blew the atmosphere off of Mars and completely wiped out the planet, which was flooded just as happened on Earth. But what happened on Earth was not a single strike. It wasn't just the Chicxulub impactor, which is estimated at 1 million Tsar Bomba strength. That's 100 million megatons of fusion energy explosion due to the impact of an asteroid, which now can be proved came from Mars. So it was a piece of Mars that hit Earth. Now, Dr. Walter Brown, one of the 2 or 3 greatest geologists of all time, who I believe is still alive, so shout out to Dr. Walter Brown. We're all set to worship at your feet, except you have some crazy theories. And we shouldn't be worshiping at your feet anyway, but relatively speaking, we respect you more than all the other geologists combined, except for your compatriots who are trying to be evangelical Christians, much to the chagrin of the Islam nations perpetually. So we have an unstable situation in every sense. Let's get going. I'm just going to read this and then we're going to take off on my theory on how the explosion on Mars, which destroyed Mars, precipitated the biblical flood. But Dr. Walter Brown's crazy theory is that the explosion that occurred, a 100 million megaton explosion, enough to wipe out Europe about 500,000 times, blew up the ecology, and only Noah in his Elohim constructed ship was able to survive the flood, after which speciation took place, as Enoch confirms. But humans cannot speciate. Science is final on that. So humans are not from monkeys, but the United States satanic government says it must be, but that's to control the nigger population of white slaves. About 10% of which are actually of a different skin color, but that's a miserable, horrible story that I hate and I won't touch it because I don't like slavery. So, to my way of thinking, surely this kind of persistency is one hallmark of a theory that is worthy of careful reconsideration. Just exactly the same thing as the biblical flood. So what Dr. Walter Brown says, who is a hero, and you should respect him, he's a discovery scientist who has basically single-handedly saved Western science from total Satanism by giving a glimpse of the truth, which is from Scripture. All right, so the biblical flood has been proved, and Dr. Walter Brown is the foremost exponent of that absolutely true, no longer a theory, but the truth is that the Earth was ecocidally destroyed by a bolide from outer space. So where did that bolide come from? Dr. Walter Brown has an inconsistent theory about that, because in his extrapolations of the results of the bolide strike, which he does not accredit to Dr. Walter Alvarez, a major oversight, so he's a slipshod scientist. I say that doesn't matter. He can be forgiven practically anything because of his valid, proved discoveries. So Dr. Walter Brown, as I find myself doing along with himself and Velikovsky, we now have to be crazy in order to get the origin of all of these proved facts. What caused the flood? Well, we know it was a bolide strike, but what else can we say? Dr. Walter Brown made a huge error, and in his book, which I will be citing shortly, which you can get for free, the final 9th edition of Dr. Walter Brown's immortal book, a long book about mostly the Grand Canyon stratigraphy sequence, but much, much more. And he way overstates his case about what the biblical flood event caused in the solar system, whereby he goes so crazy that he says that the crater impacts on the moon are from what happened on Earth. All of the asteroids are from the explosion that sent rock and other pieces of the Earth out into outer space. That's the source of the comets and the asteroids. And, believe it or not, the outer planets, which I believe are called Ceres, that is Ceres, although that's the name of an asteroid. I might have that wrong. But it's the dwarf planet further out than Pluto. So he says that's the result of material that was blown out of the Earth. That's not true. That's not true. My theory accounts for this much more accurately. What happened is that Mars was struck so as to destroy Satan's planet. And stuff that flew out of Mars was inconceivably massive. And that's what produced the comets and the asteroids and perhaps even the outer planets, but definitely the two so-called moons of Mars are not moons. Certainly not like our moon or any other moon in the solar system. It's got a couple of unique satellites, which are pieces of Mars itself that exploded off the surface. The other pieces went all over the place, several pieces of which went towards Earth and struck it. One of them was the Chicxulub asteroid, which it may have been a comet because we're not sure. The pieces that flew out from Mars were cometary pieces and asteroidal pieces, and that fully accounts for the asteroid belt, and it fully accounts for the proliferation of comets, the full extent of which no man can imagine, but there are comets all over the place, and regularly we discover new ones. So, we have a good deal of totally Halloweenish stuff going on in the solar system. Nobody's accounted for the rings of Saturn. Satan was vastly interested in that. He wanted to take a good close look at the rings of Saturn, which was finally accomplished. It is entirely possible to explain now the very evanescent existence of the rings of Saturn. It has been proved, and it has been tried to have been proved by researchers as early as Christian Huygens and other astronomers, that the rings of Saturn are extremely transient. So it's a clock. They could not have been there for very long, and they won't be there for very much longer. There are also rings on ice giant planets. And there are even rudimentary rings that have been discovered around Jupiter, the largest by far of the planets. So now we're going to complete our reading, and we've come to a half an hour, which was my goal. I think you see we're going far outside of Kansas. We're going to go into Oz to talk about how it was the destruction of Mars, much more violent than what happened to Earth, that caused the biblical flood. There is, as well as the Chicxulub impactor, another impact crater in Africa that's ginormous, another one called the Baltish crater in Ukraine, and others have been discovered. One of them is in Canada, which may have been the major impact. We're not quite sure about impacts, but now we're much more capable of explaining the Pacific Ocean, which nobody has ever been able to explain. It is exactly half the surface of the Earth. If you take a space shot from about 5 to 15,000 miles out of an exact geometric location on the Pacific surface, then 97% of what is approximately 49% of the Earth's surface, as seen in a single shot, which is a circle derived from a sphere, it's 97% ocean. That's ridiculous, because on the opposite side is the Iranian plateau going all the way into the Himalaya uplift, which is the direct result of the flood, as everyone knows, even the insane scientists. But the mad scientists, the good ones, also know how the Himalaya mountains arose from the bottom of the deepest ocean, which cannot be explained either. And there are other geological features on Earth, one of which I discovered, which is These are such cataclysmic, astronomically cataclysmic events that the human mind cannot embrace them completely, which is one reason why the flood is so frightening. Because you can't even imagine. Well, what happened to Mars was about 1,000,000 times worse. It was struck with perhaps 1 billion megaton. I don't know if that's even reasonable. It could have just. You have to be careful about this kind of an impact explosion analysis because a big enough impact would shatter the planet. Well, that partially happened with Mars. A good deal of Martian material was completely ejected off the planet and made the asteroids and comets, which a good percentage of them, from the point of view of Earth anyway, even though it's a tiny, tiny percentage, went towards the Earth and destroyed it. Not completely, though, but you see, the Elohim engineers, we know now from Enoch, as well as just common sense, that obviously the good guys recreated the Earth, or we would not have an ecology. And that's called the Everlasting Covenant, which I just covered, which I know you can't believe because you don't want the truth. Well, I'm not going to give you necessarily the truth that you want. What I'm going to give you is the titillation and distraction that you need to stay sane in this insane world. I'll try to make it more exciting than anything that even nutcases, such as perhaps Velikovsky, might be characterized as. This, I'm going to be better for you. It's going to be much more entertaining. You won't get over very quickly, even if you try, the amazing information I'm about to divulge to you. This is my job, is to give you facts. Well, we have some facts that are just, nobody knows what to do with them. Sadly, but in seeming fulfillment of the prophecies, which is misspelled with an S instead of a C, let me start again. Sadly, but in seeming fulfillment of the prophecies made by George Orwell in his classic book 1984, I have seen several instances, even over the relatively brief course of my research, in which online articles I cite have since been altered. I've seen this happen. Sometimes with references to Velikovsky removed. Why? That would be satanic because Velikovsky is perhaps spilling the beans on the Martian caper. Or information pertinent to his theories altered. However, the brave new electronic era notwithstanding, the principle has always been that once published, an author's text is fair game for quoting by others. This holds true historically even for texts that have since passed out of existence, such as certain etc. etc. The reader should be aware that some internet references may have been changed, etc. All right, in the name of a rapidly failing let me start that again. In the name of a rapidly failing ethic of intellectual integrity and cultural sanity, I steadfastly affirm that any statement included here has been validated. This ends our reading of this 1976 published author who was reviewing Velikovsky's crazy theories and has decided that there is some kind of massive cover-up going on. We will return to Mars in our next video and begin exploring our local cosmos, the heliosphere. As I stated before, the heliosphere has been accurately measured using the modern techniques of calculus as well as the advanced satanic system of technology, which, as crumbs fall from Satan the Master's table, we are allowed, on the good side of things, to get a glimpse into reality because Satan cannot avoid giving good humans that capacity while he is searching for the key to the Solomonic Temple, which may be back on Mars. So he's trying to recover something in order to open up the abyss. And that's in Revelation. So the Martian rovers, the pride and joy of American white rapist culture, is now exploring the surface of Mars on behalf of Satan, the enemy of God and all mankind, in order to recover the Key of Solomon, which will be given to the Israelis so that they can open the abyss in Israel. And they will then be what Satan wants them to be, which is unspeakably evil. And that's all in the book of Revelation, more than you'll ever be able to digest or handle. You're afraid of it, you should be. The full title of the book is The Apocalypse dash WOE, WOE, pronounced whoa, whoa, whoa. However, there is also another trilogy, or you could say trinity, of words that is not whoa, whoa, whoa. It's holy, holy, holy. And that's ultimate holy. I'm the imam. I have a right to speak. Whether you follow me or not is up to your fucking insanity to decide. I couldn't care less. But if you do listen to me, and you do accredit what I say, please leave a comment. I am human, despite all appearances. Thank you very much. This is Galactic with the secrets of the local cosmic unit, our heliosphere, called the solar system, wherein, in case you haven't looked recently, we do reside on a sphere. Thank you, we'll be right back.
Seconde. I end up with Seconde. Thank you for tuning in.